Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I'm a cloud solutions architect specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion is part 5 of an ongoing series focused on groups and their use in Microsoft Intune. Certainly some general concepts that apply to groups, but then also talking with how they specifically can be used and should be used in Intune. Today, part 5, this is a discussion that I actually thought that I had built training on previously. Maybe I missed it, but when I went back to look at what I had built, I was surprised to find out that filters wasn't in the list. So I'm actually, I've been looking forward to getting to this topic for the entire series, right? But I'm especially anxious to get to this topic because I don't have anything built yet on filters. And filters is a really, really important, critical thing to have in your back pocket as you work with different configuration scenarios, whatever with Intune, as you'll see. All right, one thing to part out up front, I guess I'll go ahead and shift to the agenda slide because we are into it, right? One thing to call out up front, right? So I've spent time talking about several times how Entra ID is the source for groups. Right? Intune makes use of groups, but Intune has no direct ability to change the way groups work or anything like that, right? That's a really, really important point to remember as we get into this, because frankly, filters were designed directly because Intune doesn't have any direct way to influence group construction and how it works, right? So groups are groups. They cannot be you can't trigger a group to refresh itself like you can a config manager collection. You can't change the dynamic group evaluation time like you can on a config manager collection. And those factors in many cases don't matter. But in some cases they do, right? And filters was introduced specifically to help in those scenarios. So that said, the agenda pretty similar to what we do in most of these sessions. What are filters? Let's just get into it. Filters are at their base the ability to deliver fine-tuned targeting to your configurations that you're deploying. We're going to dig into that as we go along, but it can apply to any Azure AD group. Right? A common place that people start using filters is in conjunction with all users or all devices. Those particular groups are where it's really easy to describe some scenarios that can be beneficial, and we will. Right? One scenario that I'll just dig into really quick here, and I'll probably say it again because it is such a good illustration. What happens if you need to deploy a configuration immediately to new devices that enroll, right? The answer many people start with is to just use a dynamic group, and they quickly find out that's not going to meet their needs. Filters in combination with all devices will meet your needs. And so that's also why what is filters? It's a mechanism to enable you to quickly and pretty much immediately deploy certain critical configurations to newly enrolled devices. Certainly not the only scenario. We'll talk about some more as we go through, and I will expand and give detail on the scenario I just described as we go forward. But definitely wanted to call that out here. Why do we use filters? What's the purpose? Well, already shared some, right? But having the ability and flexibility to granularly target a deployment. So it could be, just pull another example out of the air, it could be that you have a business unit that's on the West Coast, and you need to deploy a BIOS update to all of the devices that are on the West Coast, but are a particular model number of computer, right? So you have a choice. You can create a new group with just those devices that have that configuration, which would work, right? Or you could use an existing group that you may have created to describe all of the devices at this particular location on the West Coast. And then you don't want to target actually all of these devices. So you could combine it with a filter, and that filter would basically lay on top of the group and only allow that deployment to go to those devices in the group that are that specific model number. Again, you'll see more about that in a minute, but it gives you kind of what this reminds me of, and what it really is in Config Manager, right? We have the concept of collections, and every collection must have a limiting collection, meaning a collection above it that will contain the membership audience that is possible for the newly built collection. So maybe collection A is on top and you're building a collection B. Collection A might contain 10,000 devices, and that will be your limiting collection. So collection B can only contain up to those 10,000 devices, but likely a subset of those devices, maybe 5,000 devices, right? That's the same concept here. You have a group in Entra ID, and that group in Entra ID may contain 5,000 devices, but you really only want to deliver the configuration to a subset of those devices, so you can apply a filter, and the end result will be you are deploying to something less probably than 5,000, right? Same concept, right? In Config Manager, we did that kind of structurally to help, bring some sanity to collections and help build a dependent structure kind of thing, right? Whereas before Config Manager 2007, where we introduced that, I believe, it was kind of the wild, wild west. Well, here, it's the same kind of thing, to bring a little bit more logic and so on to groups. You don't have to maybe have as many groups if you pair them with filters, and having fewer groups is just better and more efficient on the system, right? Anyway, we'll talk more about that as we get to the end. So ease of use, right, is another reason why filters. You can create a query of device and app properties based on different things that you might want to include in the filter. It's really intended to be pretty darn easy to use. And also, when you design filters, do it with the fact that you do have a limitation of 200 filters per tenant. You'll see that again shortly, right? And so as you design these, think about the scenarios where you are deploying to your environment, and pick those that you can probably reuse. Can you build filters for a one-time use? You can, but is that the most efficient? Nah, not really. So if you can build something that makes sense for you to be able to reuse in various scenarios, then you should. And also, jumping ahead, let me just say it here. When you build filters, the filter is actually identifying those devices from the target group that you typically want to include in a deployment, right? But it's also possible to go the other way and filter devices that you want to remove from the deployment. Up to you, right? Most people that I've seen use filters to include devices rather than exclude devices, but you can do it either way. And that's another thing to think about whenever you build your filters. Could there be scenarios where that filter would be used to include certain devices, but also just as valid scenarios where that filter would be used to exclude devices, right? So, all right, more about that as we go along. So what are the requirements for filters? Well, filters work across all of our supported platforms, and it's really easy to think about filters in terms of targeting devices. But filters work also with managed apps, app protection policies, right? So we'll look at both scenarios as we get into the demo. I'll show you an example of each, right, for devices and managed apps and so on, right? You also, if you're going to be defining and manipulating filters, you do need to have the Intune administrator role. All right, there are some limitations with filters. As of this recording, could change later, we'll see. Right, there's a total of 200 filters that you can define per tenant. You can have a total of 3,072 characters in your filter. There's the ability to use filters for device enrollment. As I mentioned, this isn't really per se a limitation, but there is the ability to do for device enrollment. These, obviously, if you're going to be doing it for device enrollment, it needs to be an Intune enrollment. All right, and then there's also not a limitation again, but a capability, managed apps. You can build managed apps using, or target managed apps using filters as well. All right. So that said, just a little bit of visual illustration about how this works, and then we'll get into Intune, and I'll show you around in the Intune portal how this works. But let's just take a couple of examples. Let's just say that we have a, won't even talk about the scenario. We'll talk about the scenarios in a bit, but let's just say we have the group all devices. And we want to target a configuration, maybe right as the device enrolls, to only those devices that enroll with a given enrollment profile name. Now, typically, at least for me, when I think of enrollment profile name, I think about iOS devices. It's definitely not just iOS devices. Could be Autopilot as well. I think Google as well. I haven't looked at Google, so maybe it's not, but at least iOS and Windows. The result is that when you target all devices, which let's just acknowledge that's something that administrators, especially those coming from Config Manager, just don't feel good about doing, right? Because the idea in Config Manager of targeting all systems, there have been some interesting horror stories that have happened because of people doing that incorrectly. So the idea of targeting all devices may seem really foreign to you, and I totally get that. But in the world of using filters, it's absolutely an okay thing to do. In fact, in the scenario of enrollment like we're describing, it's really the only way to get what you want done in a quick way, right? Not the only way to get it done, but with the kind of time predictability you might want. So if you define a filter, which you'll see how to do in a minute, and use the property enrollment profile name, then the end result, typically, if you're using that as an include filter, the end result will be out of the all devices list, only the ones that have a particular enrollment profile will get the configurations that are being targeted. Yeah, those devices that were built with the enrollment profile historically would also be targeted, but in this scenario, typically that would be for new devices because the ones that are in existence for a while would already have these configurations, right? Similar, all users, if you want to target that and then use a property of device management type, right? Now, this is an example, not of device targeting, but of app protection policy targeting, right? Which we'll talk about more. Do I want to do that now? Okay, I'll just do it now. Right. One of the things. Let me pull in Intune for a moment, and I wasn't going to do it this way, but let's do it this way. What happened? Retry, refresh. Something happened to my connection apparently. So let's see what's going on with that. Okay, sorry about that. Network device decided to power off. Anyway, we're in Intune. Let me show you what I'm talking about, right? So historically, there's under apps, there's this thing called app. Let's just do Windows. Let's just do iOS. That's what I want to do. Let's do apps. Let's do iOS. Just to have one. And oh, come on. Guess I'll just have to use the main menu. Here we go. App protection policies, right? So historically, one of the very first things, if you were going to create an app protection policy, one of the absolute very first things that you would have to do if I'm going to target, whatever, one of the very first questions you would have to ask, and I forget where it was in the window, but let me just pass this and you'll see it's not here, right? Was whether up here, it would be the question, is this app protection policy going to go down to a managed device or an unmanaged device, right? And so you could do either, and I'm not going to dig into app protection policies. That's really not what the session is about. But now, you still have to decide whether the app protection policy is going to be deployed to a managed or an unmanaged device. But now the way you do that, you'll see that more in a minute, is by using filters. So here, as an example, we might target all users in this scenario, again, just one of many scenarios, and we would use the device management type filter option. And so that device management type is either going to be a managed device or an unmanaged device. That's now where you see that choice. And then the filter result will be all users using apps on an unmanaged device, perhaps would be surfaced forward, and that's where the app protection policy would apply. You could, again, do managed device if you want to, whatever you want, but that's another example. And then here's another, not using the all devices or all users. Let's say that we have a group in Intune called all kiosk Windows devices in US, right? Well, we might want to use a device category filter, whatever that category is. Maybe it's in the Eastern region, right? Whatever. And so we can apply that filter to the all kiosk Windows devices in the US group, and the result will be only targeting Windows kiosk devices that reside in the Eastern region, right? We could go on and on with these examples, but these are a few. So in terms of how filters works, and I can hear you saying, hey, just show it to me in Intune. I will get there soon. In terms of how filters work, this is just a diagram I pulled out of our documentation that attempts to show you, basically step one is the admin's going to go create the filter. And again, they're going to be reusable filters. The admin's then going to assign the group that they're going to target along with assigning the filter. And that filter, you're going to get to choose at that moment whether it's going to be an include or an exclude filter. And then after you get that done, the filter engine is going to it's going to evaluate what your intention for the filter is, and it will apply it to devices according to what the filter is. And then the process goes forward. We go ahead and apply those policies and so on at step 4. Right, pretty easy. Now, a couple more things. When we think of filters, there are only certain parameters that we can use, and they're broken down by device filter options and then also managed app properties that you can use, as you see on the screen. So these may look familiar. You might think, oh, those are the same properties that you can use for groups. And that's true. That is largely true, right? There are more properties that you can use for crafting groups, but when it comes to filtering, these are the properties that you can base your filters on, right? And you'll see that in a minute. All right, a little bit more. In terms of scenarios, here I'm going to slow down for just a minute and talk about a couple of scenarios. Again, just a few to give a flavor of how filters work. Enrolled devices. So let me rehash this scenario and add a little bit more detail to the scenario and go from there. So there was a customer I worked with some time ago, and they were moving from a third-party solution to Intune. And as we were working, they had iOS devices for them. It could be, whatever, that they were going to use as cash registers. And they were starting to build all of their, policy around restrictions, what apps should be there, etc., on those devices. And I got a call one day to say, hey, Steve, yeah, well, we've built all of these configurations and they're working, they're going down. But the problem is it might take 2 or 3 minutes after enrollment for the configurations to get there. It might take 2 to 3 hours for the configurations to get there, and that's not acceptable because these are going to be point of sales devices, and we cannot let them come up to the home screen before these restrictions are applied, right? They need to be applied instantly. And so there's a problem here. Well, fortunately, about a month, maybe 2 months prior to this discussion, we had introduced filters exactly for this scenario, right? So, mentioned already that Entra ID owns groups. We, Intune, don't have any ability to directly change the way groups function. So we built filters because we do have control over how filters work, right? And so the guidance in this scenario for these new devices that are enrolling in Intune to be able to get their policy and configurations as quickly as possible was to target those critical configurations to all devices and then use a filtered on, hey, that's why I put this here, right? Filtered on the enrollment profile name, right? Specifically to make sure that the instant those devices hit the all devices group, we are going to be able to start targeting them because our configuration targets all devices, but we're actually not targeting all devices because the filter sits in between. And so we're only actually hitting freshly enrolled devices with a specific enrollment profile name with these configurations, right? And so that solved the problem. And those devices would instantly receive all of these configurations, apply them before the home screen ever came up, right? So that's one. We've already talked about the managed apps one. I'll show you that in a minute, right? The key, not the only, but the key thing here, requirement, is that you will use a filter to designate whether that device or that configuration is going to go to a device that is managed or a device that is unmanaged, right? I put assignment in here because that is a scenario you will either use or not use filters whenever you do an assignment to achieve the targeting goals that you have, as I've talked about already. I've already mentioned also that you can use a designed filter or a filter you build to include or to exclude the filtered devices from a given assignment, right? So all of that you'll see and it'll become clear as you work with them. Last thing, there are a few, these might be scenarios, kind of discussions too, but use cases would be if you have an immediate action that you need to have happen when your device enrolls, that's a use case. Autopilot, right? There's a place where in autopilot, you will, for example, have an enrollment status page, and you can choose in the enrollment status page how you want to deploy that, and you can use filters, along with that as well. And then mixed user and device deployments, that would be a place that we can kind of mix some things up and support that kind of deployment for sure. So, for example, if you want a specific, if you want to deploy an Android mobile phone compliance policy to all users in the company, but exclude Android meeting room devices that don't support that compliance policy, that's a scenario you can use. In fact, that's directly from our documentation, right? So you can achieve that mixed user device deployment using filters. And then finally, device app protection, as I've given examples of before, and we could keep going on use cases, but now it's well past time. Let's actually get into the console and let me show you what these filters look like. So here's Intune again, and I want to show you how you first build the filters, and then I want to show you how you use the filters. All right. So filters are up under tenant administration. Come on, tenant administration. And so we'll go to filters, and you see I've got a number of demo filters here for different things. right? Notice, let's just take a peek here because this will show up in a minute and I want to show it to you. I have 2 Android filters for either unmanaged or managed apps. I have an iOS managed app filter. I have some Windows 10 filters for managed devices or Windows Server or whatever that I'm doing. I have an iOS managed and unmanaged filter here. So just pay attention to those and put that in the back of your mind. You'll see some more about that in a minute, right? But this is where you define them. So let me just go create a new one. And the first thing you're going to be asked is, do you want to create a filter for a managed device or managed app, right? And so let's choose managed device. And then you'll be given the choice of what platform you want to use. Let's pick iOS for grins. And then basically you need to choose how you want to build it, right? It's completely up to you. And all of the discussion that we've had prior to this about groups and how you can use the window here to build your choices, it applies here, right? So you can build a filter that has one line here. You know, I don't know, you can pick one that manufacturer, let's see, Lenovo, for example, and equals, right? All of these discussions we've had with properties, operators, values, all are the same. You can choose, this and then even add another expression if you need to further describe or hone in on the target audience for your filters, right? Let's say Microsoft here, actually. I'm going to show you, equals Microsoft. Oh, why is it doing that? Quit it. There. Okay. And so once you complete this and hit OK, then you'll see the rule syntax. Now you can go edit this just like we talked about in the text box discussion. And then one thing to know is you can preview and see what devices. Oh, I thought it would be Microsoft since it was virtual machines. Here, let's try this. Device. Oh, let's just try this. Equals corporate. There, let's just do that one, right? Do your preview, and it will show you that. Why am I not getting anything? Hang on. We're going to get this done. Oh, that's because it's iOS. iOS. All right, let me go back. Let me go back, and I'm going to do a filter for Windows 10 and later. Let's do that. Yeah, I didn't have any devices in here, so it did what it should. So left it alone with corporate. And now we do have some devices showing up, right? And now if we go back with the example I did do, probably it will work there as well. Let's see if I can do manufacturer equals Microsoft. And that probably will show up now the way it's supposed to, right? So preview. No, still didn't. Okay, that's odd. Anyway, so you get the idea, right? And so when you build your filter, now, this is a little bit of an oddity, and I believe this is I haven't found a way to make me feel comfortable this is not the only way to do it, so to speak. So I mentioned that you can take a filter and apply that filter to any group you want, right? And then the results of that group will be filtered accordingly. Well, there's no option in this wizard here to designate what group you want to apply the filter against. So when you do the preview, basically it's going to apply and show you every device in the enterprise that matches the filter, right? So basically think about doing this preview as working against all devices, right, or whatever. So, but it's a very useful tool to have to make sure your filter is actually pulling out the devices that you care about. So that's for managed devices, right? Now, another thing you can do is, and notice that's for managed devices, managed apps, right? So I talked about you can apply this to user groups. You can, but only in managed apps, because managed apps are targeted to users, right? That's the tie-in there, right? So there's no create managed users kind of option in the drop-down. It's either managed devices, which is uniquely devices, or managed apps. And since apps are targeted to users, that's where the tie-in happens. And so if we go here, we now select whatever device platform you're targeting. And the list of properties now is smaller, right? You can still choose whatever you need, right? But this is typically the one, at least, that you're going to have to choose. And you're going to have to choose here. It's either going to be managed or unmanaged. So you may have a scenario where you have certain users that have two devices, right? One that is their own, that is not managed, but they still want to use that device for checking mail and different things. And so on that unmanaged device, you have a different set of restrictions than for a device that is actually enrolled in Intune and it's managed, and then you have another set of configurations for it, right? This is how you designate that, right? And how you can, target, Bob or Betty, and Bob or Betty have a couple of different phones and they get the right configuration based on what your choice is here. Again, the whole topic with managed apps is huge and not one to dig into here, but still it gives you the idea, right? So this is where you create your filters. And what you have here is a library of filters. When you create the filter, it doesn't do anything. It's just a book on the shelf in the library. Until you pull that book out and start to read it, so to speak, by pairing it with a group, it doesn't do anything at all. Okay, so then how do we make use of filters? Once we define them, how do we make use of them? Well, to do that, let's just go look at a couple of different configs. I'll probably pick 3 just not to get too redundant. And let's pick devices. And I'll just choose Windows devices, and we'll use configuration here. Right? And it doesn't really matter which one I choose. Just to illustrate, I'll choose this one. It's a configuration I have out there. And so this is for Windows, right? I'm in a Windows configuration, and that doesn't matter either. I just want something I can look at the assignments. So the assignment is to a group called Windows devices. It's not all devices, it's Windows devices. And I see, the device, the group membership here and so on. If I scroll to the right, I have the ability to edit a filter and pair a filter with this assignment. So I can choose from here, either include the filtered devices in the assignment or exclude the filtered devices from the assignment. And you notice that I have 3 filters. Why do I just have 3 when on the filters page I had more than 3? I think around 8 to 10. Didn't count them. Right? And the answer is because I'm in the Windows context. And so the only filters that show up will be those that are useful to me in the Windows context. So if I were over in iOS, which I will be maybe in a minute, I would not see the Windows filters. I would just see the iOS filters, and so forth. Right? So I can do this, and I can choose the filter. That's fine, and hit select. And now I've got my filter here. Right? So I can still go back and change this if I want to. Right? But this is the result of what I am doing. So demo Windows filter, I'm excluding the results, and so forth. Right? So that's where you go actually set it on a Windows configuration. Now let me keep going. Let's go back to devices, and let me show you another. Let's say Windows, and let's say enrollment. And there's, just pick another one, right? There's autopilot, where we can do enrollment node here, autopilot. Enrollment status. Let's pick that. Right. So enrollment status page, as soon as it comes up, is targeted to all users, all devices by default. You can do whatever you want besides that, but I can choose this just for illustration purposes. And where's my, oh, hang on. Properties. All right, so my assignment is right here. This is default. I can't actually edit that. Let me go back to enrollment status page and create and blah, blah, blah. It really doesn't matter. Next, right? And then next. And then here I can add groups. Let's just go add, oh, for grins, let's just make it easy, add all users. Here's filter as well. So I can create different enrollment status page experiences for different groups of users by using filters. All right. And so on, right? So that's another. Let's just pick one more, not to belabor the point. Let's go to apps, right? And so I can go to my all apps, and let's pick one that's been deployed to iOS store app. Let's just pick that for fun. And I can go to properties, which will let me decide the targeting assignment here, right? And I have filters here as well. Now, if you want to look at the list, I don't have any filters here. Why don't I have any filters here? Clearly, whenever I looked at the list of filters, I had a couple of filters defined, I think 3 for iOS. Why do I have none here? Well, the reason is that the filters that I did define for iOS were managed app filters, not anything else, right? So I don't have any filters that would apply to this specific scenario, right? That's why, right? So let's go back to all apps for a minute, and let's go into one of the managed app protection policy kind of scenarios. I've got one here for iOS. Let's do that one now. All right, and go to properties, and then look at, scroll way down, assignments. Now this one's targeted to all users. Let me edit it. And I can go over and edit my filter. And this time I do show filters. Why? Because these are iOS filters specifically for app management. So I can pick one, select it, and off we go, right? And that's it, right? So not to belabor the point, but that is how you would go about creating filters and then using them in Intune. All right, so starting to wrap up, right? Hopefully you can see how incredibly important it is to at least understand what filters do, how you can use them. There hopefully maybe are lighting up in your mind some scenarios where filters can help you, right? So let's kind of start to wrap up. There's a few things I want to talk to you about. The first, again, is virtual groups. So virtual groups may be a foreign term to you. Virtual groups essentially are just the all devices and all users groups. Basically, the idea is instead of creating your own group, which you can, right, if you need to, if there are places where you can use the all devices and all users group, to go ahead and do it, because the management overhead is far minimized by using the what are called virtual groups, the all users, all devices. So just a recommendation there, right? There's more we could talk about with the virtual groups, but leave it there, right? And that's right here. Don't create your own dynamic groups because these are much more efficient. Other recommendations, reuse your groups, right? So as you create group objects for multiple policies, try to figure out grouping scenarios where you can reuse versus creating duplicate copies of the same group to target different policies, or creating dedicated groups for app policies and so on, right? This is just additional overhead that if you use filters, you can avoid that. And then for groups, make incremental changes. So if you have large groups that you are trying to manipulate, then maybe nesting scenarios, whatever, then try to make changes to those groups incrementally so we can process through them, and it's just a lot friendlier, on the back end and so forth. Use filters to include and exclude from your larger group, right? And folks, that's really it for this session. Really, really important one. I'm glad I finally am able to bring it forward and do this discussion, because filters are highly valuable. Knowing how to use them will help you tremendously. So we'll wrap this session here, and we have at least one more session on the group series, and we will see you next time.